Picture this, it's August 1346. A massive, glittering French army, the supposed pinnacle of medieval military might, is bearing down on a much smaller English force. The French knights, clad head to toe in gleaming steel, are the Ferraris of their day, costly, powerful, and seemingly invincible. They represent not just an army, but an entire social order built on noble blood and chivalric glory. Yet, by the end of this single day, thousands of these knights will lie dead in the mud, their horses slain, their honor shattered. And who accomplished this? A bunch of English farmers and commoners armed with what was essentially a glorified stick and string, the longbow. This is the story of the Battle of Crécy, the day the medieval world was turned upside down. So, how did this happen? How did a small, exhausted English army, led by King Edward III, achieve one of the most lopsided victories in military history? The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest the English lost a few hundred men at most. The French, they lost thousands, including over 1,500 lords and knights. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an annihilation of the French nobility. To understand this incredible upset, we need to look at the battlefield. Edward III wasn't just a king, he was a brilliant tactician. He knew he couldn't win a straight-up slugfest. So, he picked his ground carefully. A gentle, grassy slope near the village of Crécy. He positioned his army at the top, forcing the French to charge uphill. A classic move, right? But Edward had more tricks up his sleeve. His flanks were protected by dense woods and a river, making it impossible for the French to surround him. And in front of his lines, his men dug thousands of small pits, just big enough to trip a charging warhorse. It was a simple but deadly trap. Now, let's talk about the star of the show, the English longbow. This wasn't your average bow. A yew longbow could be over 6 feet tall with a draw weight of over 100 pounds. To master it took years of constant practice, developing immense upper body strength. An English archer could fire 10 to 12 arrows a minute, each one capable of piercing chainmail and even weaker points in plate armor from over 200 yards away. Now imagine 7,000 of these archers firing in unison. It wasn't just archery, it was a storm. A hailstorm of razor-sharp steel descending from the sky. The English called it the arrow. While the English were disciplined and prepared, the French army was a mess of arrogance and chaos. Led by King Philip VI, the French nobles were all competing for glory. They were a collection of individual champions, not a unified army. They arrived at the battlefield late in the day, tired and disorganized after a long march. Common sense said to rest and attack in the morning. But the French knights, eager for a glorious victory, wouldn't hear of it. They demanded an immediate charge. Philip's first move was to send in his mercenaries, 6,000 Genoese crossbowmen. Crossbows were powerful, but slow. They fired 1 bolt a minute, maybe 2. And on that day, they had a critical problem. A sudden rainstorm had soaked their bowstrings, rendering them slack and ineffective. Worse, in their haste, their pavises, the large shields they used for protection while reloading, had been left behind with the baggage train. They advanced, fired a weak volley that fell short, and were met with the full fury of the English longbows. The sky darkened with arrows. The Genoese, unshielded and outmatched, broke and fled in terror. And here's where French arrogance turned into a fatal blunder. As the Genoese mercenaries retreated, the first wave of French knights, impatient and contemptuous of the commoner crossbowmen, charged forward. They saw the retreat not as a tactical disaster, but as cowardice. In their rage, they literally trampled their own fleeing allies, hacking them down as they tried to get at the English. It was a scene of utter chaos and self-destruction before they even reached the enemy line. Then came the charge. Wave after wave of the finest knights in Christendom thundered up the muddy slope, right into the killing zone. The ground, already soaked by the rain and churned by thousands of hooves, became a quagmire. Horses stumbled into the hidden pits, throwing their riders to the ground. And all the while, the arrow snow fell relentlessly. It was a terrifying, relentless barrage that wounded horses and found gaps in the knight's armor. A knight on a charging horse was a medieval tank, but a knight on foot, weighed down by 60 pounds of steel and stuck in the mud, was a helpless target. The English archers, protected by stakes driven into the ground, simply rained death upon them. Those French knights who did manage to reach the English lines were exhausted, disorganized, and icily dispatched by Edward's dismounted men-at-arms, who fought on foot with swords and axes. For hours, the French repeated the same suicidal tactic. 15 or 16 separate charges were launched, and every single one was cut to pieces. They never learned. Their pride wouldn't let them. By nightfall, the French assault had completely collapsed. The field was a grotesque carpet of dead and dying men and horses, piled up in heaps. King Philip himself was wounded and had to be dragged from the battlefield. The age of chivalry, with its romantic ideals of noble combat, died that day on the muddy slopes of Crécy. The battle proved that a disciplined army of commoners with superior technology and smart tactics could utterly destroy a larger, aristocratic force. Crécy changed everything. It shattered the myth of the invincible knight and challenged the very foundation of the feudal social order, which was based on the idea that nobility was born to fight and rule. Suddenly, a peasant farmer with a longbow was more valuable on the battlefield than a duke in shining armor. This had profound social implications. It opened the door for social mobility and the rise of professional, paid armies over feudal levies. Warfare would never be the same. The longbow's dominance would continue for another century. But its debut at Crécy was a shockwave that reshaped European military strategy and society forever. It was a brutal lesson that technology, tactics, and discipline, not noble birth, were the new keys to victory. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into medieval history fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of battles that changed the world. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. See you next time.